He scored a try in every single test of a Grand Slam tour, 4 matches, 4 tries, a feat no player in the history of the game had ever managed on a tour of all 4 home nations, and no Australian has managed since. And then, weeks later, at 25 years old, at the absolute height of his powers, with rugby league clubs waving blank cheques in his face, he walked off the field, went home, and never played for his country again. This is the story of the most gifted attacking player Australia has ever produced, an Aboriginal kid from the edge of Sydney who rewrote how the game could be played, who captained his nation before most people thought he was ready for it, and who then vanished from the sport at the very moment he had conquered it. People are still asking why. This is Mark Ella. This is thunder from down under. To understand how unusual he was, you have to start where he started, because nobody expected a boy from there to end up here. Mark Ella grew up in Perouse, a small Aboriginal community on the edge of Botany Bay, on the very rim of Sydney. He was one of 12 children, 7 boys and 5 girls, packed into a tiny house with not much money and not much space. For a lot of kids in that place and that time, the horizon was low and the doors were mostly closed. What the Ella house had instead was sport. Endless, relentless, joyful sport, played in the street and on any patch of grass they could find, a whole family of children who could run and catch and pass as if it were as natural as breathing. And there were the brothers. Mark had a twin, Glen, born the same day, and a younger brother, Gary, and the 3 of them together would become one of the great stories in Australian rugby. All 3 would end up playing for the Wallabies, 3 brothers from a Perouse mission house wearing the green and gold. But it was Mark, the twin with the impossible hands, who would climb the highest. The turning point was a school. The Ella brothers went to Matraville High, and at Matraville there was a sports master named Jeff Mould who saw what he had and built something around it. Mould taught his backline to play flat, to stand almost on top of the defence, dangerously close to the gain line, so that every pass came at the last possible instant and every defender was left guessing until it was too late. In most schools this would have been madness. The risk of an intercept, of a crushing tackle, was enormous. But with players like the Ellas, who could handle the ball at full speed without ever looking down at it, it was devastating. It was a philosophy of attack that Australia had never really seen, and Mark Ella was its purest expression. The rest of the country found out early. In 1977, a touring Australian schoolboy side went to Britain and Ireland and simply took the Northern Hemisphere apart, winning every game, scoring tries by the 100, playing a brand of running rugby that left grown coaches shaking their heads. And there was Mark Ella at the centre of it, scoring a try in every test of that schoolboy tour, the first time he would pull off that particular trick, though not the last. The legend was already forming. People who watched those teenagers play talked about them the way you talk about something you can't quite believe you saw. From there it was Randwick, one of Sydney's grand old rugby clubs, and with the 3 brothers running the backline Randwick became almost unbeatable, 5 premierships in a row through the late 70s and early 80s. And then, inevitably, the national team came calling. Ella first toured with the Wallabies in 1979, and made his test debut in 1980, thrown straight into the furnace of a Bledisloe Cup series against New Zealand. It could not have gone better. The young 5/8 slotted a field goal in a tight win, and Australia went on to take the series against the All Blacks 2-1, their first series win over New Zealand on home soil since 1934. A 21-year-old from Perouse had walked into the biggest rivalry in the sport and looked like he belonged there. Overnight, he was a household name. What made him special is hard to put into words, which is part of why people are still trying. Ella played flat, the way Jeff Mould had taught him, right up against the defensive line, inviting the tackle, and then releasing the ball a fraction of a second before contact, so that the man outside him always ran onto it into space. He turned the usual logic of the game upside down. Normally, it is the defense that puts pressure on the fly half. Ella put the pressure back on the defense, forcing them into decisions they didn't want to make, freezing them with the threat of a pass that might come, or might not. He himself once said that if he touched the ball twice in a move, the team tended to score. If he touched it 3 times, he tended to score himself. He was a link man, a support runner of genius, forever appearing at the shoulder of a teammate exactly when he was needed, as if he could see the game a half-second before everyone else. Opponents described his ability to materialize in the right place as something almost supernatural. Then came the honor that meant more than any of it. In 1982, Mark Ella was made captain of Australia. He was the first Indigenous Australian ever to captain the Wallabies, and after the rugby league great Arthur Beetson, only the second Indigenous Australian to captain his country in any sport. Think about what that meant. A boy from a Perouse mission, from a family of 12, from a community that had been shut out of so much for so long, was now leading his nation out onto the field. He would downplay it for years afterward, the way he downplayed most things. But he knew what it was. He knew that kids were watching who had never seen someone who looked like them stand at the front of a Wallaby team. That mattered, and it always would. He captained Australia 10 times across 1982 and 1983. And then everything changed, quietly and completely, because of one man. At the start of 1984, Australia got a new coach, Alan Jones. Jones was ferociously ambitious, meticulous, relentless, a driven man who would later become one of the most famous and divisive broadcasters in the country. And Jones and Ella did not see eye to eye. Jones decided that the captaincy was weighing on Ella's game, that the responsibility was blunting the very instinct that made him great. So before the biggest tour of Ella's life, Jones took the captaincy away from him and handed it to the Queenslander Andrew Slack. It was a shock. It stung. Ella has admitted, in the years since, that it took him a while to calm down about it. But he also admitted something else, that maybe, as captain, he'd been coasting a little, and that losing the armband forced him to pull his finger out and start working harder than he had in a while. Whatever Jones's methods, the effect on Ella was extraordinary. Stripped of the captaincy, freed of the weight, the genius went to another level entirely. And there was a beautiful, quiet irony inside that same squad. Standing next to Ella in the backline was a young fly-half named Michael Lynagh, the very man who would inherit Ella's position, who would go on to become one of the great point scorers in Australian history, who would help win the 1991 World Cup. Lynagh has said that everything he learned from Ella on that tour set him up for life. Ella, in his final act as a Wallaby, was teaching the future how to play. He was handing over the flame even as he burned brightest. The tour was the Grand Slam Tour, the 1984 journey through Britain and Ireland, the chance to beat all 4 home nations, England, Ireland, Wales and Scotland, on a single trip. No Australian team had ever done it. It is one of the hardest things in the sport. 4 tests in hostile stadiums, in cold northern autumn, against 4 proud old rugby nations who all desperately want to be the one to stop you. To win all 4 is to achieve something that outlives everyone who did it. Australia started slowly. Against England, they were held tryless in the first half before grinding out the win. Against Ireland, in a ferocious, defence-heavy test where try-scoring chances were choked off, Ella did something only a special player can. When the tries wouldn't come, he simply dropped 2 goals out of the sky to keep the scoreboard moving, and still found a way to touch down himself. And then, in the last 2 tests, against Wales and against Scotland, with the forwards finally giving him a stable platform to work from, Mark Ella was unleashed. This was the football people would talk about for the rest of their lives. The flat passes, the sleight of hand, the decoy runners, the loops, the impossible support lines, the whole Matraville philosophy, perfected on the biggest stage in the game, against the best defences the Northern Hemisphere could offer. When it was done, Australia had won all 4. The only Grand Slam of its kind in the nation's history, a record that, more than 40 years later, still stands alone. Across those 4 tests the Wallabies scored 12 tries and conceded just 1. And Mark Ella, the discarded captain, the 5/8 playing outside a rookie, scored a try in every single one of the 4 tests. His own personal Grand Slam inside the Grand Slam. A feat no player had ever managed against those 4 nations, and none has managed since. He didn't just tour Britain and Ireland. He conquered it, one impossible afternoon at a time, and he signed his name on every test. He was 25 years old. He was, by common consent, the finest attacking player in the world. He had just produced the defining performance of a golden generation. And within a few months of stepping off that plane, he retired. The rugby world could not process it. Rugby league clubs, who paid real money in a game that was still officially amateur, came to him with enormous offers. He turned them all down. There was no injury, no scandal, no forced exit. He simply decided he was finished. Some pointed to the friction with Alan Jones, to a more serious, more regimented approach that had drained some of the joy out of it for a player who had always played on instinct and fun. Ella himself has been more matter-of-fact about it than anyone. He'd told his wife, his friends, most of the people at Randwick, that win, lose or draw, that tour was the end. He had, in his own words, better things to do. He'd never wanted to play forever. He came home, worked in London for a few months, was married within a week of getting back to Australia, and stepped away. It would be 5 years before he seriously picked up a rugby ball again. People compared him to the great Welsh fly-half Barry John, who had walked away at 27, men so gifted that they could leave the stage on their own terms, and did. And so the question has followed him for 4 decades, asked 1,000 times over, as if it were an unsolved case: how could someone that good simply stop? Ella says it never cost him a single night's sleep. He got exactly what he wanted from the game, and then he got on with his life.